Hello, everyone. I want to welcome you to the Region 10 Transportation Conference 2021. This is the second webinar focused on mobility. The first was yesterday. There will be two more webinars on Wednesday and Thursday. Those will be focused upon safety. We have an outstanding group of panel members here with us today. You see their photos there on the screen. I'm going to introduce each of them individually here in a few minutes, but my goal here is basically to set the stage for what we're going to be talking about with these panelists today, focused upon transportation system funding and how technology can play a critical role in advancing that. I don't think there could be anything more topical and relevant or germane in today's conversation than public transportation system funding. And certainly, if you look at what's happening at the congressional level, the current transportation infrastructure bill working its way through Congress. If you look at what's happened here in the US over the last, 70 years, the old saying goes that we've spent the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s building our transportation infrastructure here in the US. And then we've spent that time since mostly consuming it. The chart that you see up there that I'm presenting now shows that early on, the federal government had a pretty significant role in funding that transportation system. But as time has progressed, of course, we've pushed increasingly a larger proportion of that funding off to the states and local municipalities in order to fund that transportation system. That's probably not the most effective way of planning a national public transportation system, as each individual states are required to come up with their own funding mechanisms and promote those. If you look at how we fund our national transportation system, of course, we mostly fund it based upon fuel taxes. And at the federal level, we have a fuel tax that has not changed since 1993. And as you see on that map there, each individual state has mostly focused upon changing their funding mechanisms based upon the needs and political realities within their states. And so we have tremendous heterogeneity across all of these states in terms of how they fund their transportation systems. And it's probably not the most effective for a seamless and effective transportation system that functions for all people. Of course, part of the problem is related to fuel consumption, the erosion of revenues coming into the program as it relates to miles per gallon improvements over time. But as you can see, the gap between revenues coming into the program and expenditures required to maintain that transportation system has been increasing over time and is likely to increase pretty dramatically into the future. If you look at where the United States rests in terms of its per capita GDP and investment in infrastructure, it ranks pretty low in the world. Less than 1% of GDP is spent on infrastructure investment. There's a lot of course, a lot of our automotive manufacturers have stated in the last 6 months tremendous investment in electric technology. Of course, miles per gallon per car has increased over the last, pretty substantial over the last 20 years, but it is likely to take off even more dramatically in the next 20 years. Both Ford and PACCAR have just recently announced their investments in electric technology and are going to be moving fleets into the operation in the near future. And so this increases in miles per gallon per vehicle are likely to improve pretty dramatically. Meanwhile, if you look at how our infrastructure gets graded, the American Society of Civil Engineers puts a score on each of our categories of public transportation. And of course, as you can see, that has been pretty poor for a long time. And except for investments in rail infrastructure, which is predominantly privately funded, that grade has continually gotten worse and worse. And so here we are where our infrastructure keeps getting in worse shape. We've got a lot of technological changes that are happening. And so we need something that can address these types of challenges that we're facing. Electric conversion is likely to take place much more rapidly over the next 20 years. We've got other technological advances taking place in terms of autonomous connected vehicles. And so our panelists today are focused upon addressing this funding gap, and these are panelists who have had a lot of experience in this area. So I'm going to introduce the panelists now. We will start off with Jenny Roberts. Jenny Roberts is the National Road Usage Charge Program Lead at Jacobs. She has over 18 years of experience in the transportation industry, the last 10 years focused mostly on the design, planning, and development of road usage charge pilot programs. She brings a tremendous amount of experience at the national level and has worked with key stakeholders to effectively find solutions to meet those transportation funding needs. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and let Jenny take over.
Thank you, Eric. Let me know when you guys can see my screen.
We can see it, Jenny, and it's not in the presentation. There we go, now it is. Good job.
Are we good?
We're good.
Okay, well, thank you for that introduction, Eric. Excited to be here today with this great panel. And I'm going to kick us off today by first introducing you to the road usage charge concept, how it's a sustainable transportation funding solution. And I'll briefly touch on some of the road usage charge efforts across the country. So as Eric very clearly demonstrated, the fuel tax is unsustainable. We have a dramatically changing fleet with a lot more electric vehicles hitting the market. And so while our gas tax has served us well for the last 100 years, it's not going to continue to do so for the next 100 years. So when our fuel tax was first introduced in Oregon more than 100 years ago, most vehicles had similar fuel efficiency. So the fuel tax really did serve as a good proxy of our individual road usage. But with those increases in fuel efficiency and that push towards more electric vehicles today, it's no longer a fair and equitable user pays model. You can see on this chart here, under the fuel tax, there's a lot of disparity today in what users pay for their use of the roads based on the types of vehicles they drive and how much gas they're consuming. So for all these reasons, policymakers across the country have been exploring alternative funding mechanisms like a road usage charge. So under a Ruck system, drivers would be charged for the number of miles they drive instead of the amount of fuel they purchase. And this really helps bring us back to that user pays principle that the gas tax originally intended to do. So the more you use the roads, the more you pay, regardless of your vehicle's fuel efficiency. And it's important to note that in most states, Ruck is being viewed as a replacement of the fuel tax and not in addition to. So same chart here, but under a Ruck model, all vehicles pay an equal amount for the same miles traveled, which helps capture revenues not currently being collected under the fuel tax. So all road users are now contributing to road funding under a Ruck model. So Ruck exploration really started in the West with Oregon leading the charge. They've been running the first operational Ruck program in the US for the last 6 years. And I know Travis is going to share some more information on that program here in a little bit. But in 2016, Congress recognized the need for an alternative transportation funding mechanism. And so they established the Stsfa grant program for states to explore user-based alternative revenue mechanisms. And so because of that grant program, we've really seen a lot of growth and interest across the US in this Ruck concept over the last 5 years, as you can see on this map, which is now looking at the 2021 picture. So you've got some states like Oregon and Utah, and soon to be Virginia, that have voluntary Ruck programs already in place. So people are paying a road usage charge in lieu of a fuel tax in these states. Other states have conducted pilots, and some are just learning from those around them through their memberships in multi-state consortiums like Ruck West, which is a consortium of 17 state DOTs in the West who all work together sharing their best practices, ideas, and information on Ruck. And then the multi-state consortium on the East Coast is the Eastern Transportation Coalition, which was formerly the I-95 Corridor Coalition. So in 2021 alone, we've had 13 states introduce legislation related to a road usage charge. So again, a lot of momentum in the US regarding this alternative funding mechanism. So addressing public education is really the key to successfully introducing and implementing any new funding solution. And communication should really come first, and that outreach should focus on misinformation or a lot of those common misconceptions with this road usage charge approach. So you can see on this slide here, in general, our research across the US has shown that people generally don't think about how roads are funded. Our research on the East Coast specifically included several statewide surveys, which found that about only 2/3 of residents in each state believe that transportation funding is staying the same or increasing. And most feel that their roads are in relatively good condition. Excuse me. So because of this, our policymakers are really facing a challenge to talk about a new funding mechanisms without first alerting the public to the inability of our fuel tax to keep up with road maintenance. Because if people don't understand that there's a problem, they're not going to support the new concept. So our work has found that a good and effective outreach can change attitudes. In addition, public opinion research has revealed that people believe a Ruck would unfairly affect rural drivers. So both those multi-state consortiums, Ruck West and the Eastern Transportation Coalition, have conducted urban-rural analyses over the last couple of years to help better understand the potential implications on urban and rural households in individual states. And both of these studies found that most drivers across both rural and urban will see minimal change in overall expenses in a move from the fuel tax to a road usage charge. And I'll give you an example. In North Carolina, a shift to a Ruck is estimated to change overall household expenses by about $1.50 a month, one way or the other. These studies also found that rural drivers often fare better under a road usage charge compared to the fuel tax because they tend to drive less fuel efficient vehicles. And I will say that future work in most of these states is going to expand this type of analysis to also look at and evaluate the socioeconomic impacts of shifting to a Ruck system. So another concern expressed by driving public is that Ruck could penalize EV owners who are doing their part to better the environment and could overall deter the purchase of EVs. But a AAA study found that the primary motivations in purchasing electric vehicles was the environmental impacts and the reduced operating costs. And so you can see on this chart here, under a Ruck program, these drivers are still benefiting from the significant savings on fuel costs, since the fuel taxes themselves generally make up just a small percentage of the overall cost of fuel. In addition, Plug-in America has stated that they support the eventual development of a road usage charge because EVs also rely heavily on good infrastructure. So all this to say, it's time for an upgrade. Our current fuel tax does not provide the ability to leverage emerging technologies, and technology is always changing, and our future funding systems, such as a road usage charge, should be designed to accommodate these technology advancements. So there's been a lot of work done over the last several years focused on the feasibility of a road usage charge. But now we're really seeing a lot of these agencies take this a step further. What else can we do with a road usage charge? How can we leverage the technology to do more? So I'll highlight just some of the future outlooks on a road usage charge and how they're leveraging technology. We just completed a pilot with Ruck West, and this pilot tested the feasibility and accuracy of exchanging data between automated vehicles and Ruck account managers. Oregon is also looking at developing a connected vehicle ecosystem, since connected vehicles have the ability to communicate with other vehicles as well as the infrastructure around them. This is going to look at if we can leverage this connectivity to not only improve safety and mobility, but to utilize that data to also support a road usage charge. And finally, Jacobs has been supporting the Eastern Transportation Coalition in evaluating synergies between tolling and Ruck. So we've been working with Azuga. You're going to hear from Nate later. on looking at if the technology could be used to collect tolls, or if a tolling back office entity could be used to administer a RUC and help reduce administrative costs. So just a few more things to highlight. California just completed a pilot that looked at auto insurance companies and how they could serve as RUC account managers. They also explored how RUC could be charged at the fuel pump or at electric charging stations directly. And then Minnesota and California also just looked at the collection of RUC using technology embedded in shared mobility vehicles and those applications. So with that, I'll hand it back to Eric.
Excellent, Jenny. So I'm going to ask that we hold the questions, or if you have questions, you can submit them in the Q&A session or in the chat session. But I'm going to hold the questions until all panelists have spoken, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. So next we have up Travis Brouwer. Travis is the Assistant Director for Revenue, Finance, and Compliance at the Oregon Department of Transportation. And as Jenny mentioned, Oregon has been a leader in this area. They were one of the first states to implement road use charge system. He oversees all of the ODOT's financial and revenue functions, including the DMV, Commerce and Compliance Division, and Finance and Budget Division. And he has responsibility for ensuring the sustainable revenue and maintaining the agency's physical health. He's been with ODOT since 2005 and was previously the Assistant Director of Public Affairs. So I'll hand it over to you, Travis.
Thank you, Eric. Appreciate that introduction, and appreciate Jenny giving a great overview of RUC across the entirety of the nation. I'm going to zoom in a little bit on how RUC plays out in Oregon, a state that has been very engaged in this and has really been leading the way in a lot of ways, and then talk about how we see RUC as a really component of ODOT's approach to charging for roads, particularly in a post-fossil fuel world that we know is approaching. So I'll start. ODOT has a very well-balanced road revenue portfolio. Much like an investment portfolio, you want to have a diversity of sources of funding in your portfolio, and we do. We get the largest single source of funding is the fuels tax, as well as funding from the trucking industry and driver and motor vehicle fees. So while this is currently a well-balanced portfolio, a nice stable three-legged stool, that fuels tax leg is getting awfully wobbly. And so we believe that as the nation looks to address climate change and shift away from fossil fuels as the main power source for transportation, we need to be looking to shift away from fossil fuel taxes as the main way we pay for the transportation system. That will ensure that as we become more environmentally sustainable, we also can maintain our financial stability of transportation funding. So the fuels tax is really eroded by both inflation and fuel efficiency growth in recent years. It's really a 1-2 punch to our main funding source. And I should note that ODOT is strongly supportive of shifting the transportation system away from fossil fuels to decarbonizing, to moving toward electric vehicles. But we need to make sure that as we do that, we square our transportation policy with our policy on environmental sustainability. So what we've seen over the last decade is that fuel efficiency increases that have gone into effect since the last round of CAFE standards in 2011 have opened up a projected cumulative impact of $1.7 billion in total motor fuels tax revenue just in the state of Oregon through 2029. That's a pretty significant hit to our highway resources. And as you'll note, starting in 2024, the gas tax will actually start a long, slow, but inexorable decline. In fact, that would have occurred even earlier, except for the fact that we have a fuels tax increase that will go into effect on January 1st. Otherwise, that trend line would have started 2 years earlier. So we basically are seeing the long, slow death of the gas tax. It's important to note, too, that this isn't just electric vehicles. This is all vehicles. Even, a new Ford F-150 is significantly more fuel efficient than the model it replaces. So we're seeing an erosion of revenue from just about all vehicles, people paying less for their ability to use the road. In response to this, back in 2017, the Oregon legislature passed a new transportation funding package that made significant investments. One of the things they did with these higher efficiency vehicles in mind was passed very large annual registration fee surcharges on those high efficiency vehicles. So these are the surcharges on each class of vehicles. As you can see, an electric vehicle pays an extra $115 a year, or about $95 more than a lower efficiency vehicle in an upfront registration fee. Now that gets at some of those impacts that the legislature is trying to address in terms of revenue as the fleet shifts, but it doesn't really get all the way there. This chart actually shows what a vehicle pays in total annual road taxes and fees for fuels tax and registration. I put a black line across here to show approximately what the average vehicle that gets about 21 miles per gallon would pay. As you can see, more fuel efficient vehicles pay a lot less per mile, and thus they're not really paying their fair share for the use of the roads. The other thing that we find about these fuel or these registration surcharges is that they hit everyone the same, regardless of how many miles they drive. So for example, I own an electric vehicle, a Chevy Bolt, and we put about 15,000 miles on that thing every year. And so I pay $115 registration surcharge. The same would occur for someone who owned a similar vehicle, but only put a few thousand miles on. So that's not really fair. That's one of the reasons why we're really looking at road usage charging as a replacement for the gas tax to create a fair system to provide sufficient and reliable funding as we transition the fleet away from fossil fuels and toward other forms of power. Oregon has been on a long and winding road toward implementing road usage charging really over the last 20 years, starting in 2001 when the legislature formed the Road User Fee Task Force. Because you have to learn how to crawl before you can walk and walk before you can run, we've conducted a number of pilot programs. And then the legislature in 2013 passed road usage charging legislation to create the voluntary Origo program that we have today that I'll discuss in just a moment. And we've continued to make adjustments and refinements and improvements to that program since then, including with some legislation that passed both in 2017 and 2019. So the Origo program, as we've branded it, is our program for people to voluntarily sign up to pay by the mile through a road usage charge. Just like we were the first state in the nation to have a fuels tax to pay for transportation, we had the first operational road usage charging program in the world when it went live in 2015. And then as Jenny noted, some other states have followed us as well. Vehicles 20 miles per gallon and above can voluntarily participate. The thought is that vehicles below 20 miles per gallon are already paying their fair share through the fuels tax, as you saw on that chart earlier that showed that those less efficient vehicles are paying quite a bit for their use of the roads. Volunteers within the program pay 1.8 cents per mile and receive a credit for fuels taxes paid. So for my Prius, for example, I have enrolled in the program through Azuga, Mr. Breyer's firm. I pay about $5 to $10 a month more per month because I am in the program, but I do not have to pay the registration surcharge because I have that vehicle in Origo. So that provides me a financial benefit. Generally, I will end up paying a little bit more. One of the important features of this program is that we allow people to choose among account managers. We have two different account managers, Azuga and Emovis. And it's also important that people can choose between using GPS or using a non-GPS based system. The benefit of the GPS system is that it counts your miles out of state. And so you don't have to pay an Oregon tax on those miles. It's also important to note that we've built in very significant privacy protections into this program so that all the information is protected from release and Big Brother, quote unquote, never gets a hold of that information. I get to see my information in the program, but I cannot, as a state employee, access that information in any way. All ODOT gets is the aggregate taxable miles in state. We have been working to expand this program. In 2021, our Road User Fee Task Force brought forward a bill, which unfortunately failed. It made it out of committee, but did not make it through both chambers of the legislature, or either chamber of legislature for that matter. This bill would have really started ramping up with a mandatory road usage charge program to replace our voluntary Origo program. Under this bill, all new passenger vehicles that get 30 miles per gallon and above would be required to pay a road usage charge. But it would start with new vehicles, model 2027 and above, beginning on July 1, 2026. So it would have been a gradual ramp up over time, rather than requiring all new vehicles to come into the program very quickly. Any vehicle that would be required to pay a road usage charge would not pay the supplemental registration fee. And an extra financial benefit for those vehicles is that we would actually eliminate the supplemental title fees that the legislature also created on EVs and hybrids. And this legislation would have allowed people to opt out of paying a road usage charge by instead paying a flat fee. That was really important from a privacy standpoint, because even with all the privacy components we built into the program, there were still a number of people who were very concerned about signing up for the program. So we said, fine, you want to basically buy an all-you-can-drive pass? We're good with that. And so it was priced at a level to make sure that people would still pay their fair share, even if they drove quite a few miles. Unfortunately, that legislation, as I noted, did not pass. We heard a number of concerns about this. One is just the administrative costs. You know, this is a program that's more expensive than the fuels tax, but we think we can drive those administrative costs down as we scale this up. We heard a lot about privacy and data security, although we think that there are some pretty strong protections built in, and also that the opt-out fee would generally address that concern to a significant extent. We did hear a bit about potential impact on low-income households, although as Jenny noted, the impact really on most families is very small. We heard also a lot about fairness for rural drivers, but again, this is an area where all of the research that has been done shows that generally rural drivers may be better off, or at least would not be disproportionately disadvantaged compared to urban drivers. That's primarily because there are not a lot of electric vehicles or highly efficient vehicles out in rural Oregon. In our eastern part of the state, in our southern part of the state, see a lot of pickup trucks, but not a lot of Teslas or Chevy Bolts driving around. And so in some ways, many rural residents are subsidizing people in urban areas primarily who drive those higher efficiency vehicles. So we think that's a really important part of the message that we're going to work to get out. We also heard a lot from the environmental community on potential impacts on electric vehicle adoption. This, again, I don't think is actually a significant impact. As Jenny noted, for the most part, people buy electric vehicles because of the rebates that are available and to save on long-term operational costs. I, driving my Chevy Bolt, find that it is a massive cost savings compared to driving an internal combustion engine. I pay about 3 cents per mile for the electricity that fuels this. And even when you look at the taxes that would be paid by a variety of vehicles under the legislation that we proposed, a low efficiency vehicle like a Hummer or an F-150 would still pay more than a Prius or Bolt. A Prius or Bolt would pay a little bit more than they do today, but ultimately they would pay lower levels of road taxes than those other vehicles. So we think that there are a lot of good reasons why this is not going to interfere with electric vehicle adoption. In particular, one of the aspects of that is, as I noted, we have those higher registration and title fees. If we were to get rid of that, it would decrease the cost of driving a new electric vehicle off the lot by about $500. And those upfront costs are likely going to shape purchase decisions of highly efficient vehicles much more than those long-term operational costs that most people don't really factor into their purchase decision. So I want to talk a little bit now about how Ruck is an important component of our revenue system of the future that we envision. We are at ODOT pursuing the concept of true cost pricing, in which users pay for their use of the transportation system, but in which the taxes and fees that we levy on vehicles and drivers seek to recoup the costs of externalities like pollution, congestion, and those other impacts. We believe that moving toward true cost pricing can support a number of important policy outcomes. That includes congestion relief, better managing the system and managing demand on the system, reduce pollution, and sustainable funding. We would do that by looking at charging a comprehensive suite of taxes and user fees that would ask people to pay for a variety of factors. One would be system impact. As I showed earlier, we already have in Oregon a weight mile tax on heavy trucks that ensures that trucks pay by the mile and by their weight to account for the fact that they have a disproportionate impact on roads, particularly pavement and bridges. We would also ask people to pay a basic fee for use of the roads, a per mile road usage charge like Origo. On top of that, though, many vehicles would stay on the gas tax and pay a fuel or carbon tax to account for air pollution. And this would also include carbon emissions to make sure that we're hitting people or charging people for those externalities, those costs that they impose on society and the climate. And lastly, we believe that it's important to charge a congestion pricing fee or tolling for congested portions of the system. So we in Oregon are also pursuing tolling in the Portland metro region with time of day variable-based prices on our most congested facilities, particularly I-5 and I-205 moving through the Portland metro region, which have some of the worst bottlenecks in the region and really the country, to be frank. So we ultimately are looking to shift from that sort of wobbly three-legged stool with the fuels tax, weight mile tax, and driver motor vehicle fees to a more stable and larger revenue portfolio that includes the fuels tax, weight mile tax, and DMV fees, along with tolling and road usage charging as a way that both provides that sufficient and reliable funding for sustainable transportation for the future and that meets many of our policy objectives. So with that, I will turn it back to Eric.
Thank you, Travis. Next, we have Nate Bryer. Nate is the Executive Vice President of the Road Usage Charge at Azuga Incorporated. He leads the road usage charging car line of business for Azuga, which has been instrumental in developing user-friendly account management systems for the road usage charge programs in Oregon, California, Colorado, Hawaii, and Washington. He specializes in the concept of pragmatic innovation, building products and services that are new, useful, and consumer-friendly. Okay, Nate, I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right, let me share my screen. Not the screen. Well, that's weird. All right. Have you given me access?
Yeah, you should be able to.
All right. It's not giving me access.
If you like, I can show it on my screen and walk through. That's easy.
Nate, I also just made you a co-host to see if that changed your ability.
Nope. It doesn't let me share. All right, yeah, if you want to go ahead and share, I can go ahead and just walk it through. Thought we tested it. Okay, nice intro. So we've been involved at Azuga in Ruck since the inception of Oregon's program in 2014 is when they launched the RFP, and then 2013 they had the little summit, and 2015 we launched the product. Why don't you go to the next slide? So more about Ruck than us. The demand for Ruck is growing quite a bit. Both Jenny and Travis mentioned in different aspects that there's a great need for states to get involved in Ruck so that they can figure out the big gap between revenue and expenses. So based on our experience in the Ruck industry, we've learned some high-level points that can be boiled down to these 4 things. So the technology exists today to support Ruck. It's here and it's here now. Much of the systems that we use that are available on the open market, scalability and extensibility is built in. Things like cloud services and financial processing, those are built into the functions that that we use. And as Travis mentioned, privacy and security will always be a concern. Those don't ever go away, and they're things that are built into any technology platform vendors' expertise and skills. But more than anything, testing and more testing is needed. I'm going to jump to the next slide. So a little bit about some of the test, previous slide. You skipped a couple. That's right. You know what? I switched things around. Okay, so the platform. So more than what people think of in terms of the mileage reporting options, the platform needs to be made up of multiple functions in order to support all the account management that is required. So at its high level point, in the blue circle, you've got things like your full Ruck functionality, things like communications, Ruck processing, finances. Those are all built into the platform, but you also have to have multiple mileage reporting options. As Travis mentioned, we handle a couple different OBD methods. One includes GPS, one does not. We also are able to handle data directly from OEM telematics. We're also working on a way that we can collect the data manually directly from customers. You have to build out a good customer experience. So we not only have to handle the Ruck processing at the state level, we actually have to be the front of the Ruck functionality. So we have to have a good user experience. People just have a baseline expectation that when they interface with anything electronic, that is going to be easy, it's going to be intuitive, that they're going to be able to navigate around what they're using in an easy to use manner. We have to have multi-state functionality for road differentiation, for interstate interoperability that has to be built in. You also be able to have to entertain the customers to some extent. So that's where value-added services come in too. So 3 of the main functions or categories of those value-added services really center around vehicle information, safety features, or convenience. We also have to be able to get we have to get out OBD devices to customers. So we have to have a full forward reverse logistics system, be able to handle the multiple devices for people that choose that option. And then you have to be able to support the function. You have to be able to support the function for the state level and as a direct to consumer. So when people have questions, they dial an 800 number and they get somebody on the end of the line that can answer their questions. And then, as we all know, in this very data-intensive environment in the world, data is king. There's lots of data analysis, there's hostings, there's business intelligence. There is a lot of data flowing between vehicles, our systems in the state, and we have to be able to manage all those functions. Next slide. So some of the traction we've seen with our customers, we've seen that the average annual test is 9 months. Since our testing, we've had over 10,000 participants in our platform. We've done over 15 different projects, and we've tested a number of different applications. And that kind of goes to what Jenny was saying before. Ruck is one of those 9. We've also tested things like layered area pricing, congestion pricing, tolling. We've done transportation research, leveraging the data, and we've done some autonomous vehicle testing as well as fleet testing. So, like I said, there's a lot of testing that's gone on, and we've been involved with 9 different states through these 7 different organizations. Lots of testing has gone on to prove that technology really is not the issue. So, next slide. So I just want to dive a little bit deeper into the different mileage reporting options. As Travis mentioned, people like options. People don't want to be steered into just one specific way of collecting their mileage. And we also know that different vehicles can take advantage of different technologies. There is no one size fits all option. These are the different, the 5 different options that we've seen throughout our different testing that actually work, and they work well. So the OBD device, data directly from vehicles, which we call onboard telematics, a process with our partner VCon through odometer image capture, and the ability to collect manual entry of odometer readings. And as you can see, the platform can be used for multiple functions if you have the location. As you see, the location aware option gives you the most functions. It gives you the ability to charge for Ruck in state only. It gives the ability to handle tolling or congestion pricing. We actually are going to throw one in there. It's not really Ruck related, but because it's an OBD device reading emissions data off the vehicle, we can actually do remote emissions for those states that are still in the emissions testing business. Next slide. So what we found is that kind of checking the boxes, what needs to be tested? Well, account management is first. You can check that. Done, it's tested, works great. Mileage collection, just showed you the ones that we've tested that work. We've have tested a few others that we're set aside in the the discarded ways that don't really work. So collection disbursement of Ruck, we've proven that works pretty well in Oregon. We're part of their taxing system directly. As we collect the funds from the customer, we then disperse it to the state. And then state interoperability. So we are sitting in Oregon between Washington and California. We've actually done tests of collecting money for mileage that are driven in those states and sending the money in some cases virtually, but still sending it to the state for the appropriate miles with the appropriate rate for that state. The one thing kind of in red here that we have not really tested in any material way, and that's compliance. The main reason for that isn't because we haven't thought about it, is because as soon as you add in compliance to a voluntary program, people leave. So one of the things that we're going to have to figure out is how to implement and test virtually compliance in a volunteer program, or if Oregon does figure out how to get their legislation passed in a real way, that's one of the first things on the docket to implement before we go live in a live program. This, the map on the right just kind of reiterates what Jenny was saying before. Lots of testing has gone on in the US, and lots more will be coming down the pipeline. Next slide. So if testing and technology is not the problem, what is? So what I would say, the underlying problem really is something that Jenny already mentioned. It's the lack of public awareness and the issue and the viable solutions, as well as some overarching issues that have nothing to do with technology. Really, it comes down to, are people aware of the issue, and are they fully informed of what these possible solutions are? So next slide. So what we see as a solution is, first and foremost, is marketing. Not marketing in the traditional sense of advertising, you know, a fun product, but basically marketing in the sense of getting people's awareness and, you know, eyes on a page to show that there is an issue. And if you show people that green line going down and the red line going up and big gaps between revenue and costs, people kind of start to see that we need funding. A slide I do like to show, I'm not showing it here, but I like to ask people, you know, how many bridges do you think there are in the United States? And people say a lot. Well, the answer is well over 600,000. And there's a sizable percentage of them are functionally deficient. Doesn't mean they're going to fall apart, but it means that they do need a fair amount of maintenance. And the amount of money coming in to fix those and maintain them is ever shrinking. So another part of the solution is a dollar in is a dollar spent. So one of the things that we find when we are having conversations with people about what we do and our platform is they gravitate to, well, you're misspending the revenue we're already giving you through current taxes. And so we like to tell them, well, please talk to your legislator about that, because that's a problem that technology can't solve. Well, I wish it could, but it can't. That's something we noticed that some states do a better job than others, where a dollar in is a dollar spent. Some states, a dollar in is a dollar argued about where it should go. So that's something that should be really worked on. That isn't necessarily a technology solution or a technology problem. And then DMV, just like location is key to buying property, DMV is a key to successful Ruck implementation for the long term, which means that that point where I said we're not really testing or have tested compliance, DMV will need to be involved, because they're the ones that are going to have the teeth that as you go to register your vehicle, if you don't pay your Ruck or haven't paid it correctly or haven't paid it on time, they can say, you know, do not pass go. You do need to pay your Ruck before you can register your vehicle. And then legislators, you know, they're involved heavily in a lot of states, other states not so much, but we do know that any program that we go forward with will need to have them involved heavily. So next slide. So public awareness, how do we get people aware? So what we find is that we have two targeted segments, and you're just going to excuse me 1 minute. That's the fun of working from home when the UPS driver comes by. Your dogs go funny. So the targeted segments in a public awareness campaign really are broken down into pilots or programs. Pilots are temporary, the things that last from an inception operations and you shut it down. As I mentioned, the average length of most programs or pilots are around 9 months. But then you have programs. So a program like Oregon or Utah and the up and coming Virginia, you need to actually target the actual consumers, the drivers of the vehicles, EV owners, dealerships. You need to get these people aware of what the program is and what it's going to be. And there's different methods that we've worked on, that work on individually and working with the state, whether it's online or offline, but there's many different avenues for public awareness campaigns to get the word out. Next slide. So this is my last slide. Key factors, what needs to go into the awareness campaign. Basically explain what the problem is. EV adoption is growing. We need to disconnect paying for roads with a tax on something that we want to minimize. So that wasn't really mentioned by Travis or Jenny, but was kind of implied that we're taxing something that is generally accepted that we need to get away from. So we need to tax for the use of the roads, not the use of fuel. Solution is basically charge people for using the roads. I'm the third person in the panel here to mention that. We basically have a direct line of sight in paying for roads based on the actual usage. And then keep it simple. Keep it simple, sorry. Mention the problem, mention the solution, and then mention what's in it for the consumer. And then lastly, and that's kind of full circle, technology helps. So run pilots. So in addition to the awareness campaign, run a pilot. So awareness campaign is useful, but it's not very beneficial without a pilot. And pilots are wonderful, but an awareness campaign makes them even more successful. So combined awareness campaigns and technology can move this forward quite effectively. And I think the last slide is just a thank you in my context. So thank you. I'll hand it back to Eric.
Thank you, Nate. So we're going to open it up now for questions for anyone in the audience that would like to ask questions of any of the panelist members. I'm going to kick it off with a question that I was having a discussion with a colleague just a few minutes ago. So to what extent does the road user charge program account for the cost of maintenance of highway systems as you move across like different infrastructure, and how that infrastructure changes in terms of the cost of maintaining it? I mean, each of you provided examples about how, like, for example, you went across the bridge and maintaining of that particular bridge was more expensive than maybe if you chose a different route. and how it might change people's driving behavior as a result of like what it costs to go across different, features of the infrastructure. So that's the first question. And then does that, because of the fact that you're not starting at an even playing field and some infrastructure has not been maintained at the high enough level to where the cost per use is relatively low. So some transportation infrastructure, interstate highways, maybe your state highways are maintained at pretty high levels. And so the cost per use is pretty low, but some of our county city roads might be in worse condition. So I guess the question is, to what extent does it incorporate that data on the cost for usage and at what level? And does it discriminate a little bit against infrastructure that's already in pretty bad shape? And I'll let whoever, maybe, I don't know, Travis probably has the most experience, but Jenny probably do as well.
Yeah, I can give you a little bit of sense of that. And I think you start with the notion that a road usage charge is a very flexible platform for pricing the system. As we've built it right now, we have built it at a flat rate of 1.8 cents per mile, which is not based on any complicated math other than it's the fuels tax in Oregon divided by 20, because the average vehicle gets about 20 cents per mile. At that rate, well, we call that fair, paying your fair share for use of the system. At that rate, however, that is not a sustainable funding level in terms of maintaining roads and bridges in a state of good repair or making the improvements needed to move vehicles. And so we would need to have a significantly more complex pricing mechanism, which Ruck certainly lends itself to. We have just finished up a pricing pilot that Nate was part of, which looked at local area pricing. So pricing different layers of the system, say an entire county or an entire city, or even just a central business district of a city, or even a highway corridor at different levels, so that you could be accounting for congestion. You could be accounting for the cost of repairing a bridge. Right now, when you need to replace a bridge, you may impose a toll on that bridge. In the future, you could impose a higher Ruck rate for crossing that particular bridge. And so that's something we're looking at, is integrating our incipient tolling program with our existing road usage charge program, so that you'd be trying to work potentially multiple rates together into a single charge. Now, I'll tell you, I said you had to learn to crawl before you could walk, and you have to learn to walk before you can run. We're somewhere between crawling and walking. A multiple, complex system like that is more at the running really, really fast level. And so my sense is it's going to be a while before we're going to get to that point. And the public challenges that we all talked about of public acceptance may militate against ever getting to something that is that complex, because there is some benefit of just being able to say it's really simple.
Yeah, and if I could expand on that, Eric, very well. And the approach most states have taken to date, and I think I mentioned this, is let's look at this first as a replacement, right? We need to get the public on board. And part of that public acceptance is, look, we're just changing the way we're collecting a fund you already pay today, right? And so we need to get them on board with that. So we're keeping it, Nate hit on this, we're keeping it simple. If we don't do that, it will never go anywhere. And so the introduction of this is, a lot of states are taking that revenue neutral approach. Let's set a rate that basically stops the bleeding. It allows us to collect revenues from vehicles not paying anything today. So we're getting rid of that bleeding, but then those that are about that average MPG are paying about the same. And so that's really been the approach seen. Now this grant program is allowing states that flexibility to do what Travis just talked about. Take this to the next level. Let's explore what else could we one day do with this? What can we add tolling to it? Can we look at congestion pricing? And so I think that's important for states and policymakers to understand the capabilities of any future funding program. And so, yeah, we've seen Oregon did a great job with the pilot they just finished, and looking at like the local option and the corridor pricing that they did. The Eastern Transportation Coalition, Nate helped us with this. We were looking at congestion pricing as well around certain metro areas. And so we are seeing people flex this a little further, but I think going back to that public acceptance, we got to keep it simple initially or it won't go anywhere.
So if I can jump in and mention just a couple of different things here to add some color to this concept of variable pricing. So it kind of depends on your reference of what you want to do a variable on. So if you want to do a variable on the type of vehicle, that's very easy. Do a VIN lookup, so what kind of vehicle it is, boom, this is your rate. If you want to do a variable based on something that's not vehicle related, but is location based, that's also doable. You know, so our system actually is very highly accurate in terms of the granularity of the location information. But that then goes into what I was talking about earlier of kind of getting the legislators involved and making sure that we write the rules the right way. Is if you have a system that allows people to not report their miles, because that's one of your options, then you have to decide, are you going to have that as a variable option? So this really wonderful, complex, but fun program we did in Oregon for local area pricing required every vehicle to participate in with the GPS in their vehicle. So that's one of those things you got to weigh the balance of, can you do variable pricing that is location-based without a location-based information? So the answer is actually kinda. If you do enough data and modeling, you could actually model the people that aren't using location information. That just goes into, okay, let's test that. Let's make sure we're doing it the right way, and then make sure people are aware of what you're doing and why you're doing it.
Thank you. I think ideally you'd want probably both location and vehicle based, so that, you know, consumers that wake up in the morning and choose to ride their bicycle or get in their EV car or drive their big truck or whatever it is, are priced accordingly based upon their use and their impact to the system. So I'm going to go through a couple of the questions that people have added in the Q&A. And the first one, it was related to variable pricing and how it might incentivize desired outcomes. I think you guys have kind of addressed that in the question I was asking. The second one is, can you discuss the specifics of what you have seen in terms of the administrative cost of collection during the pilot phase of the Origo, and what you anticipate when there is an RUC adopted on a statewide basis? That's a big question in terms of cost.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. I was just talking to our legislative fiscal office about this morning, and I'll tell you, it's high. It's really high in comparison to something like the fuels tax. When you're looking at a very small program like ours, I mean, our Origo program only has about 800 people in it currently. It has, you know, grown over time, but it's very small, and it's essentially small by design in the sense that it's voluntary. And for most people, they will pay a little bit more to join Origo. So as a result, we've got fairly high fixed costs on both the state side of running the program and on the account manager side of running the program. We do believe that with a mandatory program that would bring in significant numbers of new vehicles, that you'd start bending that cost curve down, that those fixed costs would be spread across many, many more vehicles. You know, instead of 800 people, you'd be spreading those costs around, 100,000 new vehicles coming into the program a year, and that would reduce it. However, a road usage charge program is never going to be as cheap to collect as the fuels tax. The fuels tax is just ridiculously cheap to collect because there's only a handful of payers in most states. We collect it, at the distributor level in Oregon, and so we really collect fuels tax from just a handful of folks. I think it's better to compare the administrative cost of a road usage charge to something like tolling or DMV transactions, or for us, our weight mile tax on heavy trucks, which are probably more in the 10 to 15, 20% cost of collection, as opposed to, I think fuels tax is something like 0.3%. So it's just not ever going to be the same. And frankly, right at the moment in Oregon, we're in a point really of investing in program development, and it takes money to make money. So we're spending a little bit more upfront to develop the program over time with the hope that it will provide a sustainable funding stream in the long.
So I can jump in from a account manager perspective. Yes, account manager admin costs are going to be high for the, for low volumes. If you think about it in terms of architecture, the first floor of any 100-story building is going to be the most expensive. Every floor after that is just a fraction. So right now we're not even on the first floor. We're still digging the basement. So we're building the foundation and we're building all these things. So obviously, as with anything in the technology world, the more of it, the less the individual per unit cost is. So yeah, we're definitely looking forward to once a state like Oregon does do a mandate or even a soft mandate to see some of those costs get down, because a lot of people jump right onto privacy as an issue, and then the next thing to do is it's cost too much. And so we did prove out through this last program that the Ruck platform, which is good for collecting state funds, is also good for 3 or 4 other different things. Like I said, we've done 9 individual types of testing that our platform can do. So if you spread, the cost of collecting data across 9 different functions, you're getting down to single-digit admin costs.
So one follow-up question related to that. On one of your maps, I don't remember, maybe it was Jenny or maybe it was Nate, where you were showing basically transferring of data between Washington, Oregon, and between Oregon and California based upon use for each of those states. Have you had experience in road user charge programs that then transfer data within a state across state level, county level, city level use with those different jurisdictional boundaries? And could that be a way for helping fund the kind of the administrative cost for the total kind of design implementation, I guess?
Yeah, I think that's basically what we tested when we did our recent local area pricing. We didn't actually look at actual transfers of funds or even simulated transfers of funds across the local jurisdictions, but we were looking at, could we collect through the business rules and the technology a local option road usage charge, and then be able to distribute that money to local agencies. And yes, if we were to get more entities within a system, it could help broaden the funding base and spread those fixed costs and the operational costs as well across a larger base.
So how that looked to the actual end consumer was they actually had a line item on their simulated statement that was for the state Ruck, and then they had a line item based on which test they were in for their local Ruck. So from an accounting perspective, I'll use the non-technical term of accounting bucket. So depending on where the money was associated with on the rule, if we were going to actually be sending money to the actual place that was for the charge, we would just send the money based on a financial system we had set up. So we actually did that in Washington. That was one of the lines. For all the Washington miles, we actually sent money to a financial system that was simulated. Then they gave us the money right back, and we gave the money back to the people because we weren't really supposed to be collecting actual taxes. But we wanted to show that, is it possible to track the miles of the money and have it go to the right system? And the answer is yes.
So we have another question from in the chat session focused upon the socioeconomic impacts. I know each of you have kind of touched on it a little bit, and I think mostly what I heard you say was that compared to what people are paying right now, it won't have a pretty adverse impact upon how they transition to a Ruck system. But the question deals with, can you comment on the socioeconomic impacts of a Ruck program comparing rural versus urban and different income levels?
Yeah, so Eric, I know for the Eastern Transportation Coalition work, the next phase of that work, we went to explore that very thing. And so, like I said, this last round, we actually looked at the urban-rural impacts on individual households. And now we want to take that to the next level and have data, state-specific data to support the impacts on, you know, houses with different income levels. And so we will be coming out with that. I know some other states, I think California had a study recently about the impacts of a road charge on different income levels and whatnot. So there's a study out on that. And I don't, Travis, I thought Oregon was doing something similar, but the coalition will be coming out with that work in the next year.
Yeah, we're going to be doing, we already did one study on the urban rural impacts and an economic analysis that was based on some different assumptions. So we're going to be looking to redo that once we have appropriate data available, as that data has not been updated yet. We also are looking to understand better Ruck's equity impacts, you know, in a whole variety of ways. When we think of tax equity or socioeconomic equity, I would say that generally, as we look at it, the impacts are just incredibly minor, because the fuels tax is such a de minimis tax of what people pay. You know, I was doing some looking at data recently, and certainly the fuels tax is a fairly regressive tax in the sense that lower income individuals, lower income households pay a larger share of their income. But overall, wealthier households do pay a lot more in the fuels tax because they drive a lot more. So as a result, you know, when we've looked at the difference of shifting someone on a lower income from a fuels tax to a Ruck, it's generally no impact to incredibly minor, you know, dollars over the course of a year, as opposed to something more significant. I would also say that with the system we're looking at, or the expansion program we're looking at of shifting new vehicles first, lower income households are extremely unlikely to be buying new vehicles that are highly fuel efficient. Those are typically purchased by higher income households, and electric vehicles in particular, we know purchase is strongly correlated with income level. So that right now, in a way, lower income individuals who are driving, say, a 93 Camry are subsidizing rich guys driving a 2021 Tesla. And that doesn't seem very fair either. So there are some ways in which shifting toward a Ruck and ensuring that higher income individuals are paying for use of the roads could actually improve socioeconomic equity if it ensures that lower income households are not subsidizing higher income households.
I think from a technology standpoint, you know, if you give us the rules, we can implement them. We can just write some code to manage them. I think from our perspective as an account manager, we try to stay as neutral on the issues as possible. But I think from a socioeconomic issue, we can use those things we were already talking about, variable rates and things like that. The variables that go into the car you drive, where you live, things like that, that could be passed on along with the miles and the money. And then at the state level, they can figure out at, you know, registration or taxing, those things can be taken into account at that point instead of on a per rate basis. Because I think ultimately you probably don't want your account manager knowing how much you make every year. Whereas that's something that the state already knows, and that should be handled probably at the state level, but we can help them implement it based on the data and information we gather.
Yeah, and we're going to be looking at ways to make this system, address any socioeconomic inequities we find, and that probably is maybe more through rebates or other things that really aren't part of the Ruck system. It's looking at the totality of transportation taxes and fees. I did just find my fun spreadsheet of socioeconomic impacts. The average low-income Oregonian pays 40 cents in gas tax a day per household, not per person. And so as a result, it really is just a very tiny portion of spending. The average high-income household spends $1 a day on the gas tax. So as you can see, even a pretty substantial shift is not going to cause that much of an impact on most households. But we will try to find some ways to mitigate whatever we find.
So this will be the last question, at least that I have, and I don't see any more questions in the Q&A session. As each of you kind of look at that transportation infrastructure bill working its way through, and we know there's a lot of ambiguity about what might end up coming out or getting passed or not getting passed. Do you see that bill accelerating adoption RUC nationally or not. As I have read that there hasn't been much language that I've seen specific to it, but maybe each of you have followed it more closely.
So yeah, Eric, given the uncertainty of what's going to happen here, I mean, the bill does include some language that will extend the grant program with actually more money available over the next 5 years. So I think it's 140 million, but maybe I can't remember the exact number. And they're really pushing to get more states on board. So they're actually requiring a smaller match amount if you're a state that's never received this type of funding. And I think the language changed a little to expand it beyond just DOTs, but to like MPOs and other jurisdictions. So I think that will help a lot, allowing more people to come to the table, lowering the match amount. Right now is 50%, now we're down to 20 and 30%. And then expanding the agencies that can apply for the funding will help. The bill also includes something about a national pilot. And so they want to have a pilot, I think, with an actual exchanging of funds. And so I do think the bill could really help accelerate this alternative funding mechanism across the country. So.
Agreed.
Yeah, I agree too. Enough said.
Excellent. Well, I want to thank all of you, the panelists, for taking the time and contributing to what that was an excellent session. I appreciate all the information that you provided. For all of the attendees, I want to remind you that the PacTrans 2021 conference continues for the next 2 days. Those will be safety webinars that will start also at 11 a.m. On Wednesday and Thursday. But I'd like to thank everyone for attending, and you guys will have a good day.
Great. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.